Click.
What are you doing with that beer,
And-
Scott?
I was just.
Shut up. We're going live now. It is Thursday, December 10th, 2020, 5:02 p.m. And I want to talk about Room Raider.
Oh, God.
Who may or may not be with us in the audience, may be watching on Twitter. Room Raider, if you're watching, I'm in a fucking hammock, right? And my background is my window. And, you know, outside my window, it's dark. So, like, fuck you. All right, I want to tell you about my recent experiences with Room Raider. So, Room Raider informed me that, imperiously, a while back, that I had to put cannons in my background. Now, Room Raider's way of saying this was to tweet at me that cannons are art. Now, my cannons are very sensitive creatures, and we had a lot of discussions about whether they wanted to be in the background, but they finally decided not to accommodate Room Raider, mind you, but because they are part of my, sort of professional persona, that they were going to be in the background. So we put them in the background, and then two things happened with Room Raider. The first was Room Raider looked at my new background with cannons, which it assured me were art, a Bob Mueller puppet with a nose that looks like a penis, and
Pinocchio.
and
Pinocchio
my exposed brick wall. And Room Raider looked at Kate's background and said that Kate's background was kicking my background's ass. So that was my first beef with Room Raider. Look, I fucking followed your instructions. You wanted cannons, I gave you cannons. All right, that was a few days ago. Then today, because I don't actually listen to Room Raider, I did exactly the same background. All right? It's exactly the same. It's got my little shelves, my baby cannons, exposed brick and windows. And go on Morning Joe, do my show this morning, and unbeknownst to me, Room Raider is watching, gives me a rating, 8 out of 10, because the cannons are insufficiently sized. And
Isn't the whole point that they were baby cannons?
The whole point is that they're baby cannons. If they were adult cannons, we would have a different conversation going. Now, Room Raider also makes an interesting point that he or she or it or they want additional elements. All right. And so I know what Room Raider wants for additional elements. They want pineapples and flowers. And they're not going to get pineapples and flowers, except that Mika Oyang had a very interesting idea, which was possibly to bury a battle axe in a pineapple and do that. And so what I want to throw out, and over the course of today's show, I'm going to be using the poll feature to figure out what element I should give to Room Raider next. The condition is it has to have a weapon, because baby cannons, need weapons.
You want to borrow my knife?
It could be a knife. It has to have some element that'll appeal to Room Raider, some kind of like plant, or I was thinking maybe like kudzu or something, something. And so we're going to try to figure out over the course of the show, entirely in the polls, while the guests are doing their Guests Gone Wild thing, we're going to be figuring out what the additional element for Room Raider should be. Should it be the heads of my enemies on pikes? Which I have a lot of enemies. Pikes are cheap. Should it be... Jonathan Rauch is like, what did I get myself into by showing up on this
Jonathan's
show?
like pretty like inured to you at this point at your hijinks.
So we're going to be working that out in the polls. We're not allowed to have fun anymore. In lieu of fun, we didn't even have a guest today. we got to 1:30, and I was like, Jesus, I don't know what to do about a guest.
I was working on it. Yeah.
And so I just tweeted, I asked our audience members to come up with who they wanted to join us. And somebody immediately suggested Scott Shapiro. So that's why Scott's here. And Jonathan Rauch, who's just a model former guest, just stepped up and said, I'll do it. So we have guests gone wild, Jonathan Rauch and Scott Shapiro. And gentlemen, the floor is yours. Kate and I are going to stalk the audience, go through data, and I'm going to, by the way, we're going to look up all kinds of data about you people, but while Scott and Jonathan are talking.
We're hoping to be charged with antitrust violations in the near future.
We're going for antitrust violations. We'll bring you in if Scott and Jonathan say to, but basically this is their show, and they've done extensive planning on it. So, floor is yours, gentlemen.
Okay, I'll start.
Excited.
I'll start. John, how dare you? You go.
Scott, you are also. You really are.
So but I'll say, can I just talk about some like personal crisis that has happened?
Yeah.
So, I was talking to John. Okay.
Sorry.
You can. Yeah. I'm gonna talk about a national crisis when you're done. So that'll be a nice mix.
Okay. Because the thing is, people don't realize that my Twitter feed, I share it with this other guy, and like this other guy believes the system is working, and he always no matter how bad things are, he always says the system is working, and he's gone. I have no idea where he went. I'm really quite worried, because if he loses faith in our system, if that guy who's like Mr. Pollyannish loses faith in our system, I think we're really screwed. John?
So I don't read your Twitter feed, and I know that makes us enemies, but what does the one of you who remains on your Twitter feed think of the situation?
Personally, I mean, in all honesty, I'm just beside myself in sadness and anxiety. I can't even comprehend what is happening. The thing is, I don't even have anything interesting to say about it, other than how did we get? I know how we got to this point. The question is, what do we do now? And I don't know.
So let's flesh this out. As your therapist, what is the it to which we're referring, and what about the it to which we're referring makes you feel sad?
Well, so for example, so you have the Georgia, suit, which then gets rejected by the court. Now you have this crazy Texas suit, and then you have 107 members of Congress signing on to it, 17 states, just to basically throw out the vote of people who voted for Joe Biden. Then you have people like Ted Cruz saying that he's not going to entertain, that the Senate's not going to entertain cabinet confirmations until the litigation is finished. It feels secessionary. And I just don't know how we go on if, let's say, the Senate says we're not going to confirm the Joe Biden's cabinet. Now, I assume that things will work themselves out just at that stage. But I worry that what it is creating an enormous amount of pressure for violence. I don't see how it's not going to lead to enormous amounts of violence. So that's
I guess you noticed that Rush Limbaugh essentially called for secession yesterday.
Yeah.
He said he really didn't see how the country could continue with these two opposite camps that have nothing in common and don't belong together. And I know David French just wrote a book arguing. It's called A House Divided, I think, right? And it argues that secession of some kind, maybe not legal, but everything short of that is a real possibility. So what about that makes you sad?
Well, because it's not going to happen. There's not going to be a secession. And that just means that the only outlet for people is going to be violence. And I mean,
not that secession has been nonviolent in the past.
No, that right. I mean, of course, that's of course right. So we're not. We're not getting to the point where I really do think that Kansas is going to secede. It's just that the pressure for secession, it'll be so great, and it won't happen. That is the outlet. That is the root cause of terrorism, or one of the root causes of terrorism, is that there's a need for a certain type of policy expression, but the political outlets are blocked, and they could be blocked for lots of reasons. And people will feel that that's their only way of making serious change.
So is there like a need for like political Imodium to kind of like clear out the blockage and make it
no,
so?
Imodium does the opposite.
Oh, it does?
Yeah.
Oh, never mind.
Imodium tightens the blockage.
Yeah.
Prevents the evacuation.
Oh, I really this is why I hate Imodium. Okay, never mind.
I mean, and part of the problem is
I thought we were talking about our personal problems.
And part of the problem is that members of my family have been at least they're curious about widespread fraud. I've been able to talk them out of it to some extent, but the only way to do it is it requires an enormous amount of cognitive distance. You have to say that everything that they're being told is a lie. And who has that psychological and mental resiliency to say, actually, everything you're hearing is a lie? I mean, it's too much to ask people to do. So it's not like I'm blaming half the country. I'm saying that we're in a very bad situation, and the only outlet seems to me violence.
Okay, before I let Jonathan respond to that, I want to point out that the poll discussion of how I should respond to Room Raider is taking place, and if you're not participating in it, you may be one of those people who would vote that I should comply with Room Raider diktats, but because you haven't voted, the tell Room Raider to fuck off people are dominating the poll. So be sure you go in there and make your voice heard, because I'm actually going to follow the poll advice in how I deal with Room Raider. It's going to be completely governed by the readership here, the viewership. So be sure you make your voice heard. Jonathan?
I just want to say that, like, if I've learned anything from the last month, it is that exercising your vote is so important, but so are good attorneys. And so if after all of this is over, you feel like the results are unfair, I will represent you for a fee.
in the original jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, if you happen to be a state.
Yes. We can file all the lawsuits against Ben. It's fine. Let's go. Yeah. Anyways.
Anyway, there are 64 people who are telling me to tell Room Raider to fuck off. If you disagree with them, you better vote if you want me to comply with Room Raider, because otherwise, as soon as we're done, I'm going to screenshot this and tweet Room Raider, the viewership of In Lieu of Fun tells me to tell you to fuck off, and so fuck off. So, really make your voice heard.
I say go with the pineapple. So Scott, the other member, the other side of your Twitter feed, that's the person who usually gives you silver linings and reasons not to be sad, and that person can't think of a single one right now. That's what you're telling us.
That is what I'm telling you.
So I'm going to say what I think the it is and why I'm sad about it. I don't think the big it is the potential for violence, so that's certainly there. And I definitely don't think the it is that the election will get overturned or any of these Looney Tunes legal cases will get anywhere. The way I think about what's happening, self-advertisement, I'm writing a book about this. It's called The Constitution of Knowledge, A Defense of Truth. It'll be out in the spring. Everyone should know about it. The way I think of what's happening now is the most massive and successful disinformation campaign that's ever been run on US soil. It's being pursued in every possible avenue. I think the litigation is information warfare. It's not really designed to win. It's designed to confuse, disorient, distract, spread lies and rumors. It's happening obviously through the bully pulpit and on social media. It's a classic Russian style, what's called a fire hose of falsehood campaign, where the goal is not so much to convince people of your narrative, though you have a narrative, which is that the election was stolen. It's to convince some people, but confuse everyone else, so that, like members of your family, they just assume the election is in doubt. They will, for the rest of their lives, think, well, 2020, wasn't that the election where we were never really sure who won? The goal of this disinformation campaign is first to delegitimize Biden, second to keep Trump in the public eye, controlling the Republican Party for the next 2 to 4 years, and finally to convince a large share of the American public that the political system is not on the level and cannot be trusted, and therefore you should trust demagogues like Republicans and Trump. And I'm sad because it's working. There's no silver lining to it. When that person's gone from my Twitter feed also, when I try to think positively, I pull the camera back and I do remind myself that despite everything, America has elected a decent, moral, and law-abiding person to the most important office in the world, and that this person, Joe Biden, I think has done an admirable job of coping with this situation by not panicking and by remaining dignified. And the way these disinformation campaigns work is you troll the other side so that they respond to everything. They become panicky and they start yelling and hysterical, and that only helps you. Biden has been too smart to do that. So that's the bright side. But what's happening now is, as David French said on Twitter today, there is no what about for what we're seeing right now. There has never been anything like this. There's no word for it. The next poll that Ben should do is the In Lieu of Fun contest to name what this is. Coup isn't quite right.
Wait, what happened on Twitter today?
We got to do that in the chat because there's no free form response. So if you have a good name for
true.
What's going on, it's not a coup because there's no military force being used.
Wait,
it's
what
not even a
today?
bloodless coup, but it kind of is a bloodless coup.
No, because
it's an attempted bloodless coup.
It's an attempted. Anyway, use your name for it. Figure out what we should call it.
Wait, what? Did something specific happen?
No.
I think the kind of shocking thing to me and to many people was the 107, I think it's 107 members of Congress who signed on as amici to
against democracy.
Am I wrong in that you had to pause for a second and decide how to pronounce that word, Scott? Because that makes me feel really good if you did.
Well, I'll tell you why. Just because I was trying to figure out whether I was supposed to stress the penultimate syllable when I said amici or so.
Amici.
Amici. It would be amici. Yeah.
But wait, so 107. So it's kind of like it's like, so as Trump has gone, so have gone 107 people that should have better judgment than Trump.
Not better judgment. It's not like a discretionary thing. They just want to overturn the election, and that's kind of breathtaking. I just don't. I kind of don't even know how to process it. Like, you expect bad faith, you expect hypocrisy, one does not, at least I didn't expect that.
In the we have talked about this case before in our conversations with John Barrett, where we were chatting about which Robert Jackson opinion most moves us. And I mentioned the dissent in a case called Terminiello v. Chicago, which contains the following quote: "When democracy granted democratic methods for us in the times of our opposition, the power was bound to happen in a democratic system. However, we never asserted that we represented a democratic point of view, but we have declared openly that we use democratic methods only in order to gain power, and that after assuming the power, we would deny to our adversaries without any consideration the means which were granted to us in the times of our opposition." So that is a quotation in Robert Jackson's dissent in Terminiello v. Chicago from Goebbels, describing the Nazi attitude toward the use and abuse of democracy. And although I hate
little one-to-one, like two on the nose.
I really hate Nazi comparisons for all things, but I gotta say I've been thinking about that one today. Would the 106 Republicans who signed this brief give an opportunity to litigate to their opponents if they won?
We're having to go there. I hate Nazi and Hitler analogies too, but the kinds of disinformation tactics that are being used, the stab in the back theory, the massive outpouring of lies, all supporting a big lie. These are the way Nazi propaganda worked in the 30s.
I mean, so too did like a group of political actors that were not initially on board with Nazi action or Nazi kind of propaganda or the Nazi party, and who came on board as they rose to power in order to be closer to proximate power. I don't know. That also feels very weirdly on point. I don't know, like.
Oh, the other interesting feature of Terminiello v. Chicago is where is the passage that Justice Jackson wrote surrounding his quotation of Goebbels. So leading into it, he says, "There are many appeals these days to liberty, often by those who are working for an opportunity to taunt democracy with its stupidity in furnishing them the weapons to destroy it, as did Goebbels when he said," and that's where the quote appears. And then immediately following the quotation, he writes, "Invocation of constitutional liberties as part of a strategy for overthrowing them presents a dilemma to free people which may not be soluble by constitutional logic alone."
Yeah, I mean, so right. So one of the things about one of the things about Justice Jackson. So when I wrote the book with Ona Hathaway, The Internationalists, I spent an enormous amount of time reading all of Justice Jackson's papers from Nuremberg. And one of the things that's really interesting is that he was fascinated by the way in which the Nazis were able to seize power through the Weimar system of Article 48 and emergency rule, which I think is very central to, for example, his concurrence in Youngstown about not allowing there to be emergency rule under the United States Constitution. But another thing that really struck me, and it really poses a puzzle and a problem for Republicans, is represented in the figure of Carl Schmitt. So Carl Schmitt, crown jurist, so-called crown jurist of the Third Reich, he joined the Nazi Party in 1933. He was a political opportunist. He jurisprudentially thought that emergency rule was a good idea as a way of dealing with the pathologies of democracy. One of the things that he found out in 1936 is that you can't out crazy the crazies. And the SS came after him. They came after him because he wasn't crazy enough. And that's what happened with the Nazis. They ate each other up by weeding out the crazy. So I think to myself, what is a guy like Ted Cruz thinking? What is a guy like Marco Rubio thinking? Or Josh Hawley thinking? Josh Hawley yesterday said about the Texas case, he said it was a significant challenge and he's interested to see where it goes. Now, that was like,
Josh Hawley, who clerked for the Chief Justice of the United States and knows perfectly well,
of course he does,
that neither John Roberts nor any other member of the Supreme Court is going to do anything with this petition other than take it to the bathroom and wipe their asses with it.
Right, and so what does he think is going to happen to him?
I'm hearing. I have no idea.
That's my background. I'll mute for a second.
Yeah, what do these guys think is going to happen to them? They're going to get Fox News too, so there's a dynamic that is taking place that feels it feels like a spiral. And I'm just curious, I would ask John, so given this massive disinformation campaign, given this massive cognitive dissonance that would be required to undo it, John, do you have any advice or any positive proposal? Not that, you have to, but I'm curious if you do.
I kind of do, like everyone, I'm at sea, because we've never seen anything like this in America. It's so different. We're not even sure yet what the this is. For example, I don't think we really know to what extent the 70+% of Republicans who think that the election was stolen or rigged or wrong really specifically believe that, and what extent they're just saying kind of screw you to the system and being generally partisan. And we're not going to know that for a while. I think when you're facing a massive disinformation campaign, the first and most important thing to do is to understand what you're up against, to understand the goals and tactics that are being used against you. So that means that the news media, for example, ought to be covering what's happening as a disinformation campaign, as a coordinated assault on our cognitive systems in order to overwhelm and disorient them. They tend to cover it, as we're all trained to do. I'm a journalist by training, so is Ben. I guess you are too, Kate. We're trained to cover stories on the merits, look at a lawsuit and say, well, is there anything to it? No, this lawsuit's going to lose because they don't have standing or because there's no real complaint here or whatever. We need to understand that's not the point of these lawsuits. They're not about winning cases. They're about creating confusion. So the lead to that story might read, Republicans continued their disinformation campaign by such and such. Journalists are reaching toward that by using words like false and unsubstantiated in news stories right at the top of the story. And that's a start. But we need to be more conscious of that. And the media in turn need to do a better job of making the American public conscious that they're being manipulated. So that's one important thing we can do. Another thing we can do, I hope, I was going to ask you about this, or Ben, or Kate. So the courts have been terrific. They've shown integrity. They've been the backstop that we all hope they can be. And because they're mostly federal courts, I guess they're fairly insulated. But I'm worried about the state officials. These are people who have done the right thing. A lot of them are Republicans. they are, unlike members of Congress, federal officials, they're behaving the way we want them to behave, and they're catching hell for it. They are really catching hell for it. And that's part of the strategy, to make life very difficult for anybody who has the nerve to stand in the way of the disinformation campaign. And that's part of these campaigns, of course. It's how you silence people who want to call you out on it. And we need to find ways to both reward and protect people who are doing the right thing, so that when they go home and they find people pounding on their doors and they're getting death threats, and one official had to leave a meeting about this because there were people at her house where her 12-year-old child was alone. Find ways to protect and support those people, up to and including, to the extent it's legal, arresting and bringing charges against people who are harassing them. But there need to be clear signals that people who do the right thing will be protected. I'm not sure we're doing enough of that. Those are our two thoughts, but they're very germinal thoughts.
I like both of those thoughts. It's kind of like the opposite of of norm enforcement. It's like being all about shaming people in order to have norm enforcement, instead kind of from a positive perspective, being like, what can we do when people kind of do uphold our norms or do what we want, and like we can kind of like give them positive reinforcement instead of like it's only negative and like everything else is like at a, I think that's a lovely idea. I have a weird specific question, because I was about Nazis and referencing them, which is that we were talking before about like, and I'm curious what your thoughts about this are, Jonathan. We're talking before about like new references, and I love like the Jackson quote of Goebbels. Like that's like, I think that's like really on point. But one of the things that strikes me is that like, what does that give us? Like, what is it? Like, I think the reason people hate Nazism like references is because it is like such the echelon of like unbelievable bad that went so bad it is just like unimaginable that it ever happens again. So everything feels like hyperbole next to it. But what's interesting is that kind of analogy and reference has happened iteratively throughout history since the moment that Nazism ever came into existence. And it actually was the crux of like the Hart-Fuller debate, and like a bunch of other things that kind of ended up like, so it gets used all the time. And I guess I'm like looking back and kind of thinking, is there actually something about the comparison to Nazis historically, like that comparison through history, through moments where it's reached where like, does it tell us something different that the Hart-Fuller debate was like in the 1950s and people had lived through World War II and they invoked that debate? Or like, at this point, is it just so far removed that now it is just complete, like we don't really know that there are not that many people alive that lived through World War II anymore. And now it's complete kind of like abstract kind of remembrance of like, it's almost like like it's just kind of, does that make any sense whatsoever? I'm just trying to basically say when people have referenced this moment over time, does it matter at what point they're referencing it? And has the reference to Nazism changed over time? I guess it's like what I'm wondering. Oh, Jonathan, you're muted. Terrible.
I have unmuted you.
Am I unmuted?
Yeah.
There we go. The 5-year-old next door came to the door, so that was the So I'm gonna respond to that interesting point in not quite directly, but obliquely in a relevant way. And I'm going to say there are two parts to Nazism that we react to. One is the Holocaust. And I think over time, we developed a sense that the Holocaust was historically unique and ought to be treated that way. And therefore, we shouldn't liken it to everything else. In the course of doing that, we forgot the parts of Nazism that were not unique, and then in fact were typical of authoritarian takeovers. And that's the stuff that happened until about 1939. By stigmatizing all references to Nazis because of the Holocaust, we lost touch with the fact that a lot of regimes do what Goebbels and Hitler did. They were operating from a standard playbook. Lenin did them, Mao did them, versions of them. And now Trump is doing versions of them. And so what we're in the process of doing now is rediscovering that part of Nazism, which was just Nazis doing what a lot of people who want to undermine public institutions and trust in democracy routinely do. It's just the playbook, except now it's happening in the United States.
I think that's so correct.
Oh, what a good observation.
And there's another element to that I think is really significant, which is that the Nazis actually got it from someone. It was a merger of two things. It was the merger of
I thought that evil originated in 1939. No.
So the Nazi conception of the relationship between the party and the state is lifted whole cloth from Stalin. And, the idea that the primary organ of power, including the organs of violence, are organs of the party, not of the state. And the state is subordinated to the party, and that the party's Politburo is, in fact, controls the power of the state. That is Leninism. And Hitler, first Mussolini, and then Hitler take that from the Bolsheviks. And actually, Hitler is quite candid about this, that he has a fair bit of admiration for the way Stalin has put his state together. And interestingly, Stalin, at the time of the Night of Long Knives, is super impressed. Like he notes, wow, that guy showed some mettle. And what is the Night of Long Knives? It is an intra-party purge, right, of a type that Stalin was very familiar with, where you take out, by means of killing, a lot of your potential party rivals. And so I think the rarefication of Nazis as with all due respect to Mike Godwin, who's in our audience today, Nazi comparisons should never be flip, and they should generally not happen in Usenet groups. But the idea that you can't compare anything to the pre-1938 Nazis, these are people who had not yet done a whole lot of aggressive war. If you think about it from the Scott Shapiro, Ona Hathaway point of view, they hadn't really done the thing that we think of them as internationally as Nazis for. They had been murderous but not genocidal domestically. Why can't you compare parties to, for exactly the reasons that Jonathan describes, to, up until then, their principal murders are mentally handicapped people and political enemies, and we're not the only people in the world who were doing that.
So I agree with everything. I just want to add one more thing about the Nazi comparison, just to say that, we forget this, but Germany was the capital of the Western world of culture and education. They had,
and now they just make really good candy.
I mean, it is possible for countries to commit political cultural suicide, and for so many people, in the post-war era, the big question was, how does a people that can produce like an Einstein and like everyone of importance in the Western world end up descending into barbarism so quickly? And so we can pat ourselves on the back and say we're the hegemon of culture, Hollywood, music, academe, but so was Germany. And they just, and it wasn't the bulk work that they thought that intellectuals thought it was. And so, that's very scary.
Yeah, this is why it's so important to protect officials who do the right thing, because a lot of the meaning of what happens now will be revealed later on when we see if the people who did do the right thing at personal risk feel like, boy, that was stupid. I would never do that again. The cost has been much too high. We've got to try to reduce that cost for them.
Yeah, this is why I don't invite historians to parties anymore. It's just, it's just, I think that there is.
We have some questions.
We do have some questions. Well, I don't know, actually. I don't know the note of like David Bass's question. So maybe I'll just like save my weird story for later. But David, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
I think we might have to make him full screen to get the full effect. Yes. Ooh, my dead goal picture. Nice. Ooh.
Oh, he's muted again, though.
Oh no.
Wait.
And something for
you gotta start again because you were muted for a sec.
Okay. Well, so Ben, I've got a present for you. It's in two scenes. You saw this.
Pretty great.
I really appreciated rational security last night. That was super. So should violation of the Hatch Act be punished by disbarment or the use of pillories?
That's an interesting formulation of the question.
I'm gonna type use of pillories into Google and see what
Scott, you're the legal philosopher. Why don't you take that one?
Well, we're bringing back firing squads.
Yeah, I think that's important because I think
is that a joke or are we serious? I can't tell this conversation.
No, I actually think that's important.
That's serious.
Because when you're gonna kill somebody as the state, you really want options about how to do it. And lethal injection, you've got an option of drugs. But I think, diversifying your options here, you can go with the drug version. You can also go with the firing squad version. But I think we should have more options than that. France only got rid of the guillotine in 1980 or 79, I think. We should really diversify our portfolio here.
I'm so glad that exists on YouTube now to not be taken out of context for the rest of time in humanity.
I just need to ask lawyers seriously about disbarment. Why that's? I mean, there is a move. I guess a member of Congress is asking the bar to look into this. But what is the legal profession supposed to do in cases where people are filing frivolous lawsuits to undermine democracy?
Okay, weirdly, I'm like strangely well equipped to talk about this because my father used to actually serve on the Judicial Conduct Commission in New York State that took judges off the bench for this. So there's like for various types of misconduct. So it's a similar question, like when do you actually take a judge off the bench, or when do you decide like someone should be disbarred? And they often like would work with the New York State Bar Association. So there's a few things. It's a federalism question in that there's like all bars are local. Like they're all like state bars besides the federal bar, which you have to be a member of a state bar to be a member of the federal bar. And then like the other thing that's kind of weird is that like, I don't know, like these are frivolous lawsuits in the sense that like we can all see what they're doing from a political sense, but they're not frivolous in the sense that most people get disbarred for, which is like actually bringing like, and I've seen some of these claims, they're just mostly people bring frivolous lawsuits and just are disbarred for bringing them in serial and for personal gain. Like, so like what I mean is like, and I mean personal monetary gain. Like they like are bringing these suits to basically like force or like strong arm people into weird small settlements and get some money, and they're just kind of bad actors. They're not doing other things. It just takes a lot to be disbarred is basically what you should know. And that the levels are different for every state. And that those wheels turn extremely slowly. So they would not be like, maybe in the long run, like there will be some kind of purge, but it's not going to be fast enough as a solution to this problem. Scott, do you agree with that?
Well, yeah. Well, yes, because I mean, there's also something called Rule 11, which is sanctions associated, imposed on lawyers who file frivolous lawsuits. But I've asked around the practicing lawyers; they're almost never imposed. So, I mean, a fortiori the disbarment, and you can just. I will just say, Roy Cohn was disbarred at the end of his life.
As was F. Lee Bailey.
Yeah, but oh, I guess that's right. Yeah.
Wait, Bill Clinton got disbarred? I forgot that.
Yeah.
You're
right.
He from the bar, but not as part of a non-pros agreement with the special counsel, not as part of.
That's right, because that's super interesting. But my point is like that's about how rare it is. Like I don't know.
And do we really want to disbar Sidney Powell? Like, do we really want to give that to her? This creates one of the pathologies of this dynamic, which is that any enforcement of norms feeds into the distrust of the institutions. And this is really the question going forward, which is for the Biden administration, which is, do we, as a republic, as a democracy, do we want to punish people who are acting in bad ways? On the one hand, it will deter future actors. On the other hand, it will just feed the dynamic which they're capitalizing on. And it's really a hard question. I don't know what the answer is.
But what I think is interesting that Jonathan asked this question is also having read his book, that there's I think you, Jonathan, are used to thinking about intermediaries like bar associations having a gatekeeping function. And sadly, it's not a revolving door. It's comes in, doesn't know, and leaves. That's the gatekeeping function. And so the bar associations play. So
bars are very focused on certain types of misconduct. I spent a lot of time with the Virginia bar and its disciplinary history for a project I did for the Washington Post a number of years back. And I think if you commingle a lawyer's funds with a client's fund in Virginia, you're gonna get a bar punishment.
Oh, without a doubt.
They like bright line rules that are you cannot ever commingle your funds. So if you do that, you're going to get suspended from the bar. On the other hand, the thing that they're going to be cautious about is you're a raving lunatic and you're disserving your client and wasting the court's time. They're going to get tied in all kinds of knots about that sort of stuff. Now, I do think in this case you have some other effect going on, which is that the first court that sees a frivolous litigation, they're not going to do anything. And the second court, they're not going to do anything. But the 70th court, we are creeping up on we're well into the second half now of the first century of these cases. At some point they might say, how many other courts have you raised this in? They're not going to do this in real time. But if I were Mark Elias, I would be counting the number of courts in which Sidney Powell had made the exact same argument. And maybe after this thing is over, you got to serve your client first. You got to get your client inaugurated and stuff. But January 21st, I wouldn't be surprised to see a few sanctions motions. Not at all.
My question is, what about the Federalist Society? Does the Federalist Society give awards to Ted Cruz and have them speak at their talks?
Oh, Ted Cruz, by the way, has an invitation to come on in lieu of fun anytime and discuss his legal theory. We will even put together a moot court panel for him to moot his coming Supreme Court argument. I think we could probably help him prepare a little bit.
What kind of social sanctions? Should conservatives impose? I know so many good faith conservatives with great integrity who are just disgusted at what is happening. To what extent do they start saying?
Could you imagine being the Chief Justice right now?
No.
No,
but that was true 8 years ago also. So
but I mean, this is you have a court to hold together, and these crazy clowns are forcing you to engage. It's beneath the dignity of the court. It's I think probably the right thing for them to do is to dismiss without comment, but I would be sorely tempted, if I were the Chief Justice, to say this is an abuse of the legal system.
Yeah.
Daniel, in your native habitat, backlit as always, blending in with your chair, the floor
Don't
is
listen
yours.
to him. Go ahead.
So I have two questions. They relate to each other, which is how should universities handle the disinformation campaign? And if a Trumpist student group were to invite a speaker like Alex Jones to promote reckless falsehoods about the 2020 election, should that be permitted?
My view, I would just say that I just think that universities have this kind of unique role to play as fora for ideas and arguments, and I'm very against deplatforming. And so despite the fact that Federalist Society is a different story. They're not an educational institution. I know they say they're a debating society, but and of course I wouldn't deplatform FedSoc if they decided not to do it. But I'm very much against saying student groups, faculty members cannot invite certain people to campus. That's my own view.
Jonathan, you just wrote a book about this.
I was just going to say, Jonathan, I'm desperate to hear your thought. You articulate your thoughts.
Deplatforming backfires. It, of course, makes the person you're attempting to deplatform more notorious. And by the way, since we're on Nazi night tonight, sorry, Mike Godwin, wherever you are, but we're all in now. It's too late.
Mike Godwin's in the chat.
One of the main things that Hitler and Goebbels did was leverage the Weimar Republic censorship laws into a huge publicity bonanza, because they would put up posters saying, what is it that the government doesn't want Hitler to say? They filed lawsuits against the government. So there's no platform really like being deplatformed. A good rule for universities, I think, as a rule of thumb, is Alison Stanger's idea, which is that any student invitation which has a faculty member sponsor should automatically get university support. If there's a faculty member willing to say this person should speak here. If it's just a student invitation and the students are funding it, they ought to be able to do that. On the question of universities and disinformation, I hope, and I think this is already starting to happen, we've seen an outpouring of literature on disinformation, information warfare. active measures, trying to understand what's going on here in the 4 years of the Trump administration, which has been an unprecedented, massive, continuous disinformation campaign against the American public emanating from the White House and conservative media. I think we're going to start to see a lot more departments and a lot more studies in universities understanding what's going on here and how to deal with it. And by the way, we're also seeing a lot of that in the social media companies. Kate, as you know, I write about this some in my book, but some of the best and most innovative thinking, although still in its early stages, is by places like Facebook and Twitter, trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work in a disinformation climate.
Well, I mean, the hard part about all of this is the tech companies do not understand that that's what they're dealing with. When they make these decisions, all they see is the fire. They don't like kind of understand the structure that goes, like the implications of everything that goes with putting it out and like how they would go about putting it out. Yeah. And then like, I think that but I think everything that you said is completely correct. And I also agree with deep platforming. It's like a defamation suit. It's like, it's the Barbara Streisand effect. You just draw attention to whatever it is that you like, that you're trying to ban or you're trying to stay away from. And I think it just cuts unless like there's something that you so badly need to prove is like just absolutely a lie. Like it ends up giving fuel to like the fire and the attention. And in this, like, I would actually say it's worse because in the schematic of like our current social media environment, you say anything right now and like both the denial and the non-denial end up becoming fodder for a conspiracy theory or like alternative like understandings of the truth or what the truth is. And like it's a very hard, I don't know. I wouldn't, if I was like going to go back and do a philosophy degree, I would not have gone into epistemology at this exact moment. Like I feel like I feel a little bit like everyone thinks that they're an epistemologist now. And like, it's just not like, it's not a well understood, but you're the philosopher, Scott. So you tell me.
As I said, we've been in an epistemological crisis since 1627 when Descartes published Discourse on Method. I would just want to make an argument of principle, not just of consequence. I think universities are fora for debating ideas. And I feel like that needs to be preserved at almost all costs, with the exception of screaming fire in a theater, kind of those kinds of exceptions. I remember when I was an undergraduate and Mayor Kahana was invited to Barnard, and I went to hear him speak, and I thought, wow, he's really crazy. And that was really important to me to learn. And I never would have learned it had I not actually gone to hear him. And I feel like inviting people like Alex Jones, I don't think that's a good use of our resources, but I think, if you can't talk about ideas in a university, I don't know, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a very similar experience with Kahana, actually. It was not in person, though, but it actually did matter to me as a teenager to hear him, to learn who he was. And I still remember the radio interview to this day. All right, we got to get through our last two questions, and then we will wrap. Esther, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone.
Wow.
Well, it's a lot of noise. Jonathan, can you read my question
the noise
yourself?
is on Jonathan's end,
And
not on yours.
Can he see it?
Go ahead. We can hear you fine.
Well, I'm going to apologize to everyone who voted for this question because I'd like to save it for the next time Jonathan is on his own, since it's really specific to him, and say that great episode, but pretty dark. And I really would like to end on a lighter note. It's the first night of Hanukkah. And so here I'm going to throw this out to Jonathan Scott. Please incorporate some humor in this. The system's broken. Design us a new.
There you go. We should
Yeah.
have
That's
We
like
should
a
That's
have
supposed-
have you both back.
constitutional convention.
yeah. I there's nothing funnier than institutional design.
Wait, hold on. That is my lifeblood. That's all of my
No,
life. Is that why no
no,
one's funny?
Wait, Kate,
Yeah?
you're invisible.
I'm getting a candle for Hanukkah. I forgot it was
okay.
the first night of
You
Hanukkah.
kind of need two.
Okay.
Wait,
David
I-
Botts, you get the last question.
Okay, so on a little bit of a lighter note, the Pfizer vaccine has just been approved for emergency use, so that's good. The question that I have, and you have a choice of 4 for the 2020 Person of the Year: President-elect Joe Biden, President Donald Trump, frontline healthcare workers, and Dr. Fauci. And option 4 is the Movement for Racial Justice. So those are the 4 options for Person of the Year for 2020.
oh,
Kate,
whoa!
what do you think? Who's
What were the options again? Person for racial
Trump?
justice.
Biden.
Fauci representing healthcare workers, or the Movement for Racial Justice, which doesn't seem to have a name or face individual attached to it?
I'm solidly mixed between like Fauci and racial justice.
Is this someone's actual like
Yeah,
list,
this is
like
the
time?
Yeah, this is
finalist
the
for Times Man of the Year award.
Really?
Oh, so I can't say Chris Krebs.
No, because we're limited by Times choices here.
I'm going with Biden,
Really?
Okay.
and I'll tell you why.
What are you
This
going
is the reason I'm going with Biden is that, like everyone else, when he entered the race, I thought he was lost a step, a bit out of it, man behind his times. As the campaign went on, something happened which I don't recall seeing in a campaign in my time, except maybe to some extent Reagan in 1980, but not really, which is the candidate grew in stature over the course of the campaign and proved himself, I think, by election day to be the right man for this moment in America. I just can't think of someone better able to meet the specific needs right now, which is to rise calmly to a difficult situation, marshal a lot of experience, show some dignity in the office, reduce the salience of the office, and just be a decent human being. I feel like for all the darkness, to go back to the previous question, it is important to remember that a good man is about to become president of the United States.
Yeah, that's kind of
Scott,
nice.
what do you think? Who should
I agree.
By the way, for everybody, the poll is up. The last poll item is this question: who should be Times Person of the Year award? I should have said person. I said Man of the Year. I apologize. So vote. And Scott, don't be influenced by how the masses are voting. You're the elite Yale law professor here.
Yeah.
What's the right answer?
The right answer is, how come I never make any list? I don't understand. But I never make any list. I'm not in a global thinker. I am not like, I am not 60 under 60, 50 under 50. I never ever make any goddamn list.
I want to point out that if you right now go to, so I've added Scott Shapiro to the list. You can vote for him. I'm not sure if that's going to make him happier or unhappier.
Yeah, I'm going to unvote for Biden and vote for Scott.
But I do
The
want to
Economist, the Prospect, the Statesman, never ever. I'm so upset about this.
Can I just say one thing? Scott, shut up for a second. Go to Jonathan Rauch's personal website, and you will see at the top of it is the number of years that he has lived without winning a MacArthur Genius Award.
Wait, really?
Yes, it is right there every year. And I have to tell you, I was once asked to be a nominator for the MacArthur Foundation and sworn to secrecy, which I'm about to violate. And And I was sworn to not say who I was nominating. So Jonathan Rauch certainly did not know that I nominated him for a MacArthur Award. And when I did so, the closing line of my letter cited the fact that his personal website notes the number of years, which I think then was 57, that he had gone without a MacArthur Genius Award. And I told them not to let him get to 58. And they did let him get to 58. Jonathan, which shows what my advice was worth to the MacArthur Foundation. And so you are not alone, Scott Shapiro.
I by the way, can I just say something? I feel way better, but I'm going to say something which is really, I mean, you'll never have me on again, but I've never even given a TED talk, not even a TEDx talk, and I don't even know what that is.
What about a TEDx talk?
I don't know what that is.
No, I made it up just now.
But there. So I reject this Time Man of the Year type of thing until I make one list. They're dead to me.
All right. So
Fair
who's
enough.
going to win according to? So Fauci is solidly ahead of Biden and Scott Shapiro, and really ahead of. I'm surprised that the Movement for Racial Justice didn't do better in this poll. I think the only explanation for that is it helps to have a name associated with it. I think Fauci is, got this like whole badass thing going, and like it wouldn't be quite as good without Fauci. That said, look, it's 8 minutes past the hour, and Kate is holding a bauble.
I am a ethnically ambiguous Jewish person / WASP, and I know about Hanukkah from friends and other people. And so I know that it is about not having enough oil, which conveniently in my very seafaring New England.
The defeat of forces of modernization by the Jewish Taliban of its time, which was a purifying kind of Salafi strain of Judaism that had a really good propaganda arm and has come down through the ages. They even got a Handel oratorio out of the thing.
This really sounds like it's like everyone has their own version of Section 230, and so I don't really. But I have a lamp with actually conveniently very little oil in it, and I'm going to light it. And then we'll see what's happened. But I'll let you know. There we go. Happy Hanukkah.
All right.
Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah, everybody.
Yeah, happy Hanukkah.
Hold it up so we can get a screenshot to tweet.
Nope.
Hang on. Wait.
Screenshot. I should
Smile.
have it.
Gotcha. All right.
A miracle happened here tonight.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
All right. We will be back. Do we know who our guests are? Were we having the 2:30 debate tomorrow, speaking of Section 230?
Oh, no, because Carrie is, I don't think, let me check with Carrie, but probably not. And then, but maybe we will have David Allen Green.
So we won't
instead.
have.
I love David Allen Green.
Unless
he's
we do.
Great.
And if
Yeah,
we
he's
don't, we'll
great.
have David Allen Green, who will not appear in the flesh, but only
He just
as
applies
a
very
disembodied
audio.
voice. We will. That'll be in any event 22 hours and 50 minutes from now. Until then, thank you, Jonathan Rauch. Thank you, Scott Shapiro.
Thank you.
We will see
Thank you, John.
anon.
Nice to meet you, Scott.
Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Oh, man, I'm
Until
glad you
then-
guys finally got to meet.
We don't have fun anymore, but we do have purifying sort of ethnic anti-Greek forces that, that really, kill a lot of people. And then we call it a great miracle. So, see you tomorrow.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Happy Hanukkah.
Now, the more you learn about the Maccabees,